"Mom, did you ever visit the beach house Dad left you?" My son asked that question so casually over Thanksgiving dinner that for a second, I thought I had misheard him. The dining room suddenly felt too warm. The candle beside the mashed potatoes flickered softly, and somewhere in the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed like distant static. I looked up from my plate slowly. "What beach house?" I asked. Ryan's smile faded, just slightly, the kind of change most people would never notice. But mothers notice everything about their children, especially when they're lying. Across the table, Claire's wine glass slipped from her fingers and hit the tablecloth with a dull thud. Red wine spilled across the white fabric like spreading paint. "Claire," Ryan said quickly, reaching for napkins. "Careful." But Claire wasn't looking at the stain. She was looking at me, and in that single moment, I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The kind that comes when pieces of your life suddenly stop fitting together the way they used to. "The place in Cape May," Ryan continued carefully, dabbing at the table. "Dad bought it years ago. He said he wanted you near the water after he retired." I stared at him. My late husband had been gone for almost 5 years. 5 years of clipped phone calls, quiet holidays, and learning how to make one grocery bag stretch across 2 weeks. 5 years of counting blood pressure pills before bed and pretending I wasn't lonely inside that tiny Connecticut condo with the leaking windows. "Ryan," I said softly, "your father never left me any beach house." Silence settled over the table. Sophie stopped eating and looked between her parents nervously. Outside, snow drifted quietly past the dining room windows, soft and slow beneath the porch light. Claire forced a laugh first. "Too fast. Too sharp. Maybe Harold planned to surprise you with it someday," she said. "Or maybe there was some paperwork issue." Paperwork issue. Strange words to use so quickly. Ryan frowned now, genuinely confused. "No," he said slowly. "I remember Dad talking about it after his surgery. He said he finalized everything. The trust, the deed, all of it." Claire reached for her wine again, but her hand trembled slightly. "Ryan, honey, maybe this isn't the best time." "What do you mean?" he asked. "Mom never got the house." I watched them carefully then. Claire kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from the tablecloth. Ryan looked stunned. And suddenly, memories I had ignored for years began surfacing one by one. Claire insisting she helped sort my mail after Harold died. Claire offering to simplify my finances because paperwork overwhelmed me. Claire intercepting phone calls whenever Ryan was busy. Little things. Tiny things. The sort of details women my age are told to overlook because we're supposed to be grateful our children still visit at all. I suddenly remembered a letter from a law office 3 years ago. Claire had glanced at the envelope before smiling politely and saying, "Oh, probably another insurance scam. I threw it out for you." At the time, I thanked her. Now my stomach tightened. Sophie quietly pushed peas around her plate. "Grandma," she asked innocently, "you really don't have a beach house?" "No, sweetheart," I said carefully. "I don't." Ryan leaned back slowly in his chair, staring now at Claire instead of me. "That's impossible." Claire stood abruptly. I think I left the rolls in the kitchen. She disappeared too quickly. Her heels clicked sharply across the hardwood floor before fading into silence. Ryan rubbed his forehead. "Mom, Dad talked about that place for years. He said it was your dream home." Dream home. The words nearly broke something inside me. Because for 5 years, I had been surviving instead of living. Wearing the same winter coat Harold bought me in 2018. Keeping my thermostat at 62 degrees to save money. Skipping dinners some nights because medication came first. And all this time, my husband may have left me something. Something no one ever told me about. I looked toward the kitchen doorway where Claire had disappeared. The house suddenly felt different. Not warm anymore. Not festive. Just quiet. Too quiet. Like something rotten had been hiding beneath the floorboards for years. And for the first time since Harold died, I began to wonder if my loneliness had never been accidental at all. I barely slept that night after Thanksgiving dinner. The radiator inside my condo clicked every few minutes, filling the silence like a nervous heartbeat. Outside my bedroom window, the parking lot was covered in dirty snow, gray around the edges where cars had driven through it all week. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Ryan's question over and over in my mind. The beach house Dad left you. Not wanted to leave you. Not hope to buy someday. Left you. Past tense. Certain. Real. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen wearing Harold's old navy robe. The tile floor felt cold beneath my feet. I opened the refrigerator and looked at the small plastic containers lined neatly on the shelf. Leftover turkey, half a carton of milk, generic brand yogurt cups I had bought because they were on sale. I suddenly thought about the dinners Ryan and Claire posted online every weekend. Expensive restaurants in Manhattan, ski trips in Vermont, wine tastings in Napa Valley. Claire smiling in cream-colored sweaters while holding glasses of champagne beneath soft restaurant lighting. I had spent years convincing myself their lives had nothing to do with mine. Children move on. That is what people always say. But now another thought kept slipping into my mind no matter how hard I pushed it away. What if I had been pushed aside on purpose? The next morning, snow flurries drifted through the air as I walked to the mailbox near the front office of my condo complex. My knees hurt in the cold. I carried a canvas grocery bag because one of the handles on my purse had broken last month and I had not replaced it yet. Inside the mailbox were 2 utility bills, a pharmacy coupon, and a Christmas card from my cousin in Ohio. Nothing else. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the empty metal box. Then I remembered something Claire used to say all the time after Harold died. Mel gets lost constantly these days. At the time, I believed her. I believed everything back then because grief makes you tired in strange ways. It makes simple decisions feel impossible. After Harold passed away, I could barely remember passwords or appointment dates. Claire stepped in quickly. Too quickly, maybe. "Let me help you organize things," she told me the week after the funeral. She bought me labeled folders. She forwarded calls. She offered to stop by and sort paperwork because Ryan was overwhelmed at work. I used to feel grateful watching her move around my kitchen confidently while I sat at the table with cold coffee and swollen eyes. Looking back now, I realize how little I actually saw. That afternoon, I pulled out an old storage box from my bedroom closet. Dust coated the lid. Inside were years of papers I had not touched since moving into the condo. Tax returns, Christmas cards, insurance statements. Harold always handled finances during our marriage. He liked paperwork, said numbers relaxed him. As I sorted through the stack slowly, a memory returned to me so clearly that I stopped breathing for a moment. 3 years earlier, I had received a voicemail while grocery shopping. A man introduced himself as Edward Lawson and asked me to call him regarding property documents connected to Harold Whitmore's estate. I remembered listening to the message while standing beside the frozen food aisle at Walmart. When I mentioned it to Claire later that evening, she barely looked up from her phone. "That sounds suspicious," she said casually. "People target widows all the time." Then she smiled at me gently. "You really need to be more careful, Helen." I never returned the call. Sitting on my living room floor now, surrounded by old papers and unopened memories, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. Claire had always sounded prepared. Every answer came too quickly. Every explanation arrived before I could ask a second question. Outside, wind rattled softly against the windows. I picked up Harold's framed photograph from the shelf beside me. His smile looked tired in that picture, taken during his final summer alive. "What did you try to leave me?" I whispered quietly, and for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than grief beginning to rise inside me. Suspicion. The following Tuesday, rain covered the town in a dull gray mist that made everything outside my condo look faded and tired. I sat beside the living room window with Harold's storage box still open at my feet and a yellow legal pad resting on my lap. For the first time in years, I began writing things down instead of pushing them away. Dates, conversations, strange moments I used to dismiss because I trusted my family more than my own instincts. Once I started remembering, I could not stop. Claire always inserted herself between me and information. Not loudly, never aggressively. She did it gently, like someone adjusting a picture frame that had tilted slightly crooked. So subtle you barely noticed it happening. I remember the year after Harold died when the bank called while I was visiting Ryan and Claire for Easter brunch. Claire answered my phone before I could reach it. "It is probably spam," she said, stepping into the hallway. A few minutes later, she returned smiling calmly and placed my phone beside my plate untouched. Nothing important. At the time, I believed her because grief had made me tired of dealing with complicated things. Another memory surfaced while rain tapped softly against the windows. 2 winters ago, my water heater broke during a January cold snap. The repair estimate was nearly $900. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the bill while snow piled against the parking lot outside. Ryan had offered to help immediately, but Claire stopped him before he could finish speaking. "Your mother needs to learn how to budget long term," she said lightly while stirring cream into her coffee. "If we keep rescuing her every time something happens, she will never become financially independent." Financially independent. I almost laughed now remembering those words. I had spent 43 years married to a man who owned commercial property across 3 states, and somehow I ended up feeling guilty for replacing a broken water heater. I turned another page on the legal pad. Underneath the word mail, I wrote 4 separate incidents I suddenly remembered with painful clarity. Birthday cards arriving opened already. Utility notices showing up weeks late. A pension statement Harold once told me never to ignore. That somehow disappeared entirely. Claire always had explanations prepared before I could even ask questions. The Postal Service has gotten terrible lately. Paperwork mistakes happen all the time. You know how confusing financial documents can be. The frightening part was not how convincing she sounded. The frightening part was how badly I wanted to believe her. Around noon, my landline rang unexpectedly. Very few people called me anymore. Most communication happened through text messages now, and I still preferred writing things on paper. I almost let the call go to voicemail before finally answering. "Mrs. Whitmore," a woman asked politely. "This is Patricia Bennett." The name hit me immediately. Patricia and Harold worked together years ago in Boston before we moved to Connecticut. I had not spoken to her since Harold's funeral. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said carefully. "But I heard something over the holiday weekend that concerned me." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What did you hear?" There was a brief pause. Then Patricia lowered her voice slightly. "Edward Lawson has been trying to locate you for years." My heart began beating harder. "The lawyer?" "Yes," she said. "Harold hired him before his second surgery. He handled the property transfers and trust documents." Rain streaked slowly down my living room window beside me. "Patricia," I whispered, "I think something is very wrong." Another silence followed, heavy this time, knowing. "Helen," she said quietly, "Harold loved you too much to leave you struggling the way you are." I closed my eyes then, because suddenly the last 5 years no longer felt random. They felt organized, managed carefully by someone standing close enough to smile while doing it. Patricia exhaled softly into the phone. "You need to speak with Edward Lawson immediately," she said. "And whatever you do not tell Claire first." The next morning, I drove farther than I had in months. The highway stretched gray beneath a low December sky while old Christmas songs played softly through the radio speakers. My hand stayed tight on the steering wheel the entire drive into Hartford. I kept expecting my nerves to settle. Once I arrived at Edward Lawson's office, but they only grew heavier with every mile. The law office occupied the 3rd floor of a red brick building across from the courthouse. Everything inside smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. A young receptionist greeted me politely before leading me into a conference room lined with shelves of leather-bound legal books. I sat alone at the polished oak table listening to the ticking wall clock while snow began drifting outside the windows again. Then the door opened. Edward Lawson looked older than I remembered from Harold's funeral, more tired around the eyes. But the moment he saw me, genuine shock crossed his face. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said slowly, "I cannot believe you are actually here." Something inside me tightened immediately. "You have been trying to contact me?" I asked. He stared at me for several seconds before sitting down carefully across the table. "For almost 4 years." The room suddenly felt too quiet. Edward opened a thick folder resting beside him and removed several documents secured with colored tabs. "Your husband instructed me to ensure certain assets transferred directly to you after his passing," he explained gently. "When I received no response from repeated certified letters, I assumed you chose not to proceed." Certified letters. My stomach turned cold. Edward slid copies of mailing receipts across the table toward me. My name appeared clearly on every line. Helen Whitmore. My condo address. Dates spanning years. I counted at least 12 separate attempts. "I never received these," I whispered. Edward frowned deeply now. "That is impossible." Several required signatures confirming delivery. He flipped another page slowly. Then he stopped moving altogether. "Wait." I looked up. Edward adjusted his glasses and stared harder at one of the forms. "This signature," he said quietly. "This is not yours." I leaned forward. My breath caught instantly. Someone had signed my name in smooth, careful cursive. Helen Whitmore. It looked close enough to fool a stranger. But not me. My real signature always tilted slightly upward at the end because of arthritis stiffness in my wrist. This one was too perfect, too controlled. No, I said softly. I did not sign that. Silence settled heavily between us. Edward removed another document from the folder. Then another. Several more signatures appeared beneath delivery confirmations and legal acknowledgments. All fake. All accepted as real. I suddenly remembered Claire insisting years ago that she check my mailbox while I recovered from pneumonia one winter. "You should not walk across icy sidewalks," she had said warmly while carrying soup into my condo. I closed my eyes briefly. Every act of kindness now felt poisoned. Edward leaned back slowly in his chair, his expression turning grim. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "your husband established a trust containing multiple assets intended solely for your support." He paused before continuing, "including a beachfront property in Cape May, New Jersey." Hearing the words spoken aloud made my chest ache in a strange, hollow way. Real. It had always been real. Edward handed me a photograph clipped to the file. A white coastal house stood beneath pale blue skies with wide windows facing the ocean. Wind moved through tall beach grass surrounding the porch. Harold once promised me we would retire near the water someday. I remembered standing beside him on a crowded pier 20 years earlier while he pointed toward the Atlantic and smiled. One day, he said, "No more winters." Tears blurred my vision briefly, but I blinked them away. Edward's voice lowered carefully. "There is something else you need to know." He opened another folder, smaller this time. Inside were financial transfer records, withdrawal authorizations, redirected mailing forms. Every signature carried my forged name beneath it. But one detail stood out more than anything else. Emergency contact and processing coordinator. Claire Whitmore. I stared at the page while snow drifted quietly outside the office windows. Then Edward said the sentence that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "someone has been managing your inheritance without your knowledge." The drive home from Hartford felt longer somehow. Snow melted slowly against my windshield while traffic crawled beneath a sky the color of wet concrete. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on Harold's file folder sitting on the passenger seat beside me. Every few minutes, I glanced at it again as if the documents might suddenly disappear. For years, I believed my life had simply become smaller after Harold died. Smaller apartment, smaller grocery budget, smaller holidays, smaller importance inside my own family. I never imagined someone had been quietly shrinking my world on purpose. By the time I reached my condo complex, the sun had already begun setting behind the bare trees lining the parking lot. Orange light reflected weakly across patches of old snow near the sidewalks. I carried the folder inside carefully like something fragile. Once the door closed behind me, I locked it immediately. Then I stood there in silence listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of television from another apartment down the hall. My home suddenly looked different to me. Not comforting anymore, just temporary. Like a waiting room I had been trapped inside for years while someone else lived the life Harold intended for me. I sat at the kitchen table and slowly spread the documents across the surface. Property records, financial statements, copies of trust paperwork. The numbers alone made my stomach tighten. Harold had not left me struggling at all. The trust contained enough money to comfortably cover medical expenses, housing costs, travel, and retirement. There were monthly disbursements scheduled directly to my accounts beginning the year after his death. Payments I never received. My eyes moved lower across one page until I found another familiar phrase. Mailing redirection authorization. Approved by coordinator, Claire Whitmore. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Outside, headlights drifted across my window blinds in soft, moving lines before disappearing again. For several minutes, I simply stared at the paperwork while memories replayed differently now. Claire offering to help me move into the condo instead of keeping the larger family home. Claire recommending cheaper insurance plans. Claire encouraging me to sell jewelry I no longer wore because retirement should be simple. Every conversation suddenly carried another meaning beneath it. My phone buzzed against the table unexpectedly. Claire's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Helen," she said warmly. Too warmly. "I just wanted to check on you after Thanksgiving. You seemed upset." I looked down at the forged signatures spread across my table. I am fine, I said quietly. Good, she replied quickly. Ryan was worried he might have confused you talking about that beach house. Your memory has been under a lot of stress lately. The sentence landed softly, smoothly, but I heard it clearly now. Not concern, positioning, creating doubt before questions could begin. I remembered all the times Claire corrected me in front of others over harmless details. Actually, Helen, that happened in 2019, not 2020. You must have forgotten. You always mix those stories up. Tiny comments repeated over years until even I began second-guessing myself. My memory is fine, I said carefully. Silence flickered briefly on the other end of the line. Then Claire laughed softly. Of course it is. I just mean grief affects everyone differently. Grief. She always returned to that word whenever things became uncomfortable, as if sorrow explained everything, as if loneliness naturally erased bank accounts and property deeds. Are you coming for Christmas Eve dinner? She asked lightly. Sophie keeps asking about you. I looked around my quiet kitchen, the chipped coffee mug near the sink, the grocery coupons beside the toaster, the coat hanging near the door because I kept the thermostat low to save money. 5 years. 5 years of this life, while someone else controlled what belonged to me. Yes, I answered calmly. I will be there. Wonderful, Claire said immediately, relief slipping into her voice before she could hide it. We will see you soon. After the call ended, I remained still for a long time. Then I opened Harold's old leather notebook from the bottom of the folder. Inside the front cover, written in his familiar handwriting, was one sentence. For Helen, so she never has to worry again. I pressed my hand gently against the page, and for the first time since this nightmare began unfolding, I stopped feeling confused. Someone had stolen from me, quietly, carefully, patiently, but they had made one mistake. They assumed I would never start paying attention. Over the next 2 weeks, I said nothing to Ryan or Claire about what I had discovered. I answered texts normally. I attended Sunday lunch at their house. I smiled when Sophie showed me the ornaments she made at school. On the surface, everything looked exactly the same. But inside, something had shifted permanently. I had spent years feeling invisible inside my own family. Now I realized invisibility could be useful. People reveal everything when they believe you are harmless. One Thursday afternoon, Edward Lawson arranged for copies of additional financial records to be delivered directly to my condo instead of through electronic mail. Paper leaves fewer traces, he told me quietly over the phone. By then, even simple notifications made me suspicious. I no longer trusted who could access what. The envelope arrived during freezing rain. I carried it inside carefully and sat at my kitchen table beneath the weak yellow light above the stove. As I opened the records, my heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Calm had replaced shock now. Cold calm. The kind that comes when pain finally hardens into clarity. Most of the withdrawals were disguised as administrative transfers connected to the trust. Processing fees, property management expenses, elder care planning consultations. At first glance, everything appeared professional, organized, legal enough to avoid attention. But Edward had highlighted certain transactions in blue ink. Large amounts moved through a private limited liability company registered in Delaware. The name meant nothing to me. Whitmore Coastal Holdings, LLC. I stared at the words for several seconds before realizing what frightened me most. Someone had created an entire company around my inheritance. My phone buzzed again unexpectedly. Ryan. Hey, Mom, he said warmly when I answered. Claire and I are touring a retirement community for her aunt this weekend. You should come with us sometime. Some of these places are honestly beautiful. I looked down slowly at the paperwork spread across my table. Elder care planning consultations. My fingers tightened around the phone. A retirement community? I repeated carefully. Just to look, Ryan said quickly. You know, planning ahead. Claire thinks it is smart to prepare early before health problems happen. Claire thinks. Claire says. Claire believes. I had heard those phrases so often over the years that I barely noticed them anymore. But now every sentence sounded different. Rehearsed almost. Maybe someday. I replied quietly. Good, Ryan said cheerfully. We just worry about you living alone. Living alone. Another phrase I suddenly understood differently. After the call ended, I returned to the records and found another highlighted document near the bottom of the stack. Property intent authorization. My eyes moved slowly across the page until they stopped at the address in Cape May. The beach house. Beneath it sat a proposed sale agreement scheduled for review immediately after New Year's Day. Listing preparations already approved. My breath caught sharply. Claire was preparing to sell the house before I even knew it belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair while freezing rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Then another realization arrived, even colder than the first. Ryan's signature did not appear anywhere on the sale authorization forms. Not once. The trust paperwork connected only two names repeatedly. Mine and Claire's. I suddenly remembered Thanksgiving dinner again. Ryan's confusion looked genuine because it was genuine. He truly believed I owned the beach house already. He thought his father's wishes had been honored years ago. Claire had hidden the truth from both of us, but for very different reasons. I stood slowly and walked toward the living room window. Across the parking lot, an elderly man helped his wife carry groceries through the icy slush while she held his arm carefully for balance. Simple kindness. Quiet loyalty. Harold would have done the same for me without hesitation. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because Claire betrayed me, but because Ryan never noticed I was disappearing right in front of him. The cheap winter coat. The overdue dental appointments. The way I always ordered the least expensive thing on restaurant menus. He never saw it because someone else had carefully controlled what he believed about me for years. I looked back at the sale documents resting on my kitchen table, then at Harold's notebook beside them. For Helen, so she never has to worry again. Claire had spent 5 years building a quiet machine around my life. A machine designed to keep me dependent, confused, and small long enough for her to take everything completely. But machines only work while nobody interrupts them. And finally, I was paying attention. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in freezing wind and fresh snow that covered the Whitmore driveway in a clean white layer by sunset. Warm yellow light glowed through the large windows of Ryan and Claire's house, while holiday music drifted softly from hidden speakers near the ceiling. From outside, everything looked perfect. The kind of family Christmas people post online beside captions about gratitude and togetherness. I sat in my car for an extra minute before getting out. Inside my purse rested copies of every document Edward Lawson had prepared for me that week. Forged signatures, transfer records, property sale authorizations, quiet proof of a quiet theft. I walked carefully up the icy front steps while holding the railing with one hand. Before I could knock, Sophie pulled open the front door, smiling brightly. "Grandma," she shouted before wrapping her arms around me. I hugged her tightly and breathed in the scent of cinnamon from the house behind her. Children still trusted the world completely. That innocence suddenly felt fragile to me now. Claire appeared moments later wearing a cream-colored sweater dress and pearl earrings. Elegant, calm, controlled as always. "Helen," she said warmly while kissing the air near my cheek. "You made it through the snow." "Of course," I replied quietly. Her eyes lingered on me for half a second longer than normal, measuring something, looking for signs. But I gave her nothing. Dinner unfolded exactly the way Claire preferred. Candles perfectly spaced. Along the table, matching gold napkins folded beside polished silverware. Ryan carving the ham, while Claire directed conversations smoothly between guests like a television host controlling a program. Several of Claire's friends joined us that evening along with her younger sister Amanda and Amanda's husband. Everyone laughed loudly at stories. Wine glasses clinked softly. Christmas music floated through the background. And all the while, I watched Claire carefully. Once you stop trusting someone, their performance becomes visible everywhere. The overpracticed smiles. The interruptions disguised as concern. The way she answered questions directed at Ryan before he could respond himself. Halfway through dinner, Amanda mentioned retirement planning after discussing her mother's recent move into assisted living. "Honestly," Claire said while sipping wine, "families wait too long to have those conversations." I kept my eyes on my plate. Aging alone becomes dangerous quickly, Claire continued gently, especially when memory issues begin. Ryan nodded absent-mindedly while cutting another piece of ham. "Mom still does pretty well though," he said. Claire smiled softly. Too softly. For now. The room grew quieter around us. Subtle enough that nobody acknowledged it directly, but everyone heard the sentence. I felt Sophie glance toward me from across the table. Claire folded her napkin carefully beside her plate before speaking again. "I just think we all have to make responsible decisions before emergencies happen. Pride can make older people refuse help even when they clearly need it." There it was. Not an attack. Something worse. Public positioning. The beginning of a narrative. Frail widow. Confused memory. Needs supervision. Needs management. Suddenly, I understood why Claire wanted Christmas Eve surrounded by witnesses. She was preparing the stage long before anyone realized a performance had started. I lifted my water glass calmly. "You seem very interested in managing my future lately," I said quietly. Claire laughed lightly. "Helen, we are only worried about you. Worried enough to sell my property." The silence that followed felt immediate and absolute. Forks stopped moving. Even the music suddenly seemed too loud in the background. Ryan looked up sharply. "What property?" Claire's face did not collapse dramatically the way guilty people do in movies. It changed in a much smaller way. A tiny pause behind her eyes. A calculation. Then she smiled again. "Helen," she said gently, "I think you are confused." Confused. The word landed exactly the way she intended. Soft enough to sound compassionate. Strong enough to plant doubt. But this time I was ready. I reached slowly into my purse and removed a folded document. Then another. I placed them quietly beside my dinner plate while Claire watched me without blinking now. "Interesting," I said calmly, because Edward Lawson seemed very certain these signatures were forged. Ryan frowned immediately. "Edward Lawson?" Claire turned toward him too quickly. "Ryan, your mother does not understand these legal issues." "Actually," I said softly, "I understand them very well now." Snow drifted steadily outside the dining room windows while nobody at the table moved. Then Ryan reached forward slowly and picked up the documents resting beside my plate. And for the first time since Harold died, I watched uncertainty enter my son's face. Ryan stared at the documents in silence while the rest of the table sat frozen around him. The only sound came from the faint crackling of the fireplace in the living room and the soft instrumental version of Silent Night still playing through the ceiling speakers. Snow continued falling outside, thick and steady now, coating the backyard in white. Claire finally reached for the papers in front of Ryan with a calm expression that looked practiced rather than natural. "This is ridiculous," she said lightly. Helen clearly misunderstood something during a meeting with that lawyer. Ryan did not hand her the documents. His eyes stayed fixed on the signatures instead. "Why is your name on these?" he asked quietly. Claire smiled again, smaller this time. "Because I helped organize paperwork after your father died. You know that." "These are withdrawal authorizations," Ryan replied slowly. "Why were you authorizing transfers from Mom's trust?" Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside her husband while nobody else at the table spoke. Claire placed both hands calmly on the edge of the tablecloth. "Ryan, your mother was overwhelmed after Harold passed away. Someone had to manage things responsibly." "Manage what?" I asked softly. "The beach house I never knew existed?" Claire finally looked directly at me then. Her expression remained composed, but the warmth had disappeared completely. "Helen," she said carefully, "you were not in a condition to handle large financial decisions at the time. So you handled them instead?" Ryan asked. His voice sounded different now, sharper, more awake. Claire exhaled slowly like someone exhausted by unreasonable people. "I protected this family," she said. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if Helen suddenly had access to millions of dollars while grieving?" "Millions." The words settled heavily across the room. Ryan blinked hard. "Millions." Claire realized too late she had said more than intended. I watched her carefully as she adjusted her posture and tried regaining control of the conversation. "The trust was complicated," she continued quickly. "Taxes, liability management, property maintenance. Someone needed to make practical decisions." "Without telling me?" I asked quietly. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. "You trusted me before, because I thought you were helping me." Ryan stood slowly from his chair now, still holding the documents in one hand. "Claire," he said carefully, "did Mom ever receive any of the trust payments Dad left her?" Claire did not answer immediately. That silence told him everything before words ever could. Sophie looked nervously between her parents from the far end of the table. "Mom?" she whispered softly toward Claire. Claire turned toward her daughter instantly, her voice gentler now. "Sweetheart, adults are discussing financial misunderstandings." But Ryan kept staring at the paperwork. "She lived in that tiny condo for 5 years," he said quietly, almost to himself. "She kept saying she could not afford things." I watched realization spread across my son's face piece by piece. The cheap birthday gifts I always insisted were enough. The old winter coat. The canceled dental surgery I blamed on insurance problems. He remembered all of it now. You told me she preferred living simply, he said slowly to Claire. She did. Claire snapped back too quickly. Then she softened her voice again. Ryan, your mother has always been emotional with money. Harold worried about that constantly. Do not speak for my husband, I said quietly. The room fell silent again. Claire looked at me differently now. Not dismissively anymore. Cautiously. Because for the first time, I was no longer playing the role she built for me. Weak widow. Confused mother-in-law. Harmless burden. Ryan lowered himself back into his chair slowly while rubbing his forehead. Did you forge Mom's signatures? He asked finally. Claire's composure cracked for the first time then. Barely, but enough. I signed certain administrative forms to avoid delays, she said defensively. Everything I did benefited this family. This family, Ryan repeated. You hid my father's trust from my mother for 5 years. Claire's voice sharpened suddenly beneath the pressure. Because somebody needed to think rationally. Sophie flinched quietly at the tone. Then, in the middle of that heavy silence, my granddaughter asked the simplest question in the world. If Grandpa left Grandma a house, she said softly, why was Grandma always worried about money? Nobody answered her. Claire looked away first. Ryan stared down at the papers in his hands. And in that moment, I realized the real damage had finally surfaced. Not the money, not the property. Trust. The kind families spend decades building and only seconds destroying. 6 months later, I stood barefoot on the deck of the beach house watching early morning waves roll toward the shore beneath a pale blue sky. The air smelled like salt and cold ocean wind. Seagulls drifted above the water while sunlight spread slowly across the Atlantic in soft silver lines. Harold was right. Winters felt different near the ocean. Softer somehow. Quieter. I wrapped both hands around a warm coffee mug and listened to the sound of the tide moving steadily against the sand below. For years, my world had become smaller, without me realizing it. Now every room inside the beach house felt almost unreal to me. Wide windows, open light, shelves Harold once planned to fill with books after retirement. Edward Lawson helped transfer everything back into my control by February. The legal process moved faster than I expected once the forged signatures were confirmed and the financial records were fully reviewed. Claire fought desperately at first. She claimed misunderstandings, administrative confusion, temporary asset management decisions made under emotional pressure. But paperwork tells stories more honestly than people do. The records showed too much. Redirected mail, unauthorized transfers, sale preparations connected to property she never legally owned. In the end, even her own explanations collapsed beneath the weight of the documents. Ryan moved out of the house in March. He called me several times before I finally answered one afternoon while unpacking dishes in the beach house kitchen. His voice sounded older somehow. Mom, he said quietly, I should have noticed. I stood at the sink staring through the windows toward the ocean while he spoke. I keep replaying everything, he continued. The condo, your old car, the way you always worried about money. I believed every explanation because it was easier than paying attention. Easier than paying attention. I appreciated the honesty because it hurt precisely for that reason. Most betrayals inside families do not begin with cruelty. They begin with convenience. You trusted your wife? I said softly. I stopped seeing you, he answered. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after that. Some damage does not heal the moment truth appears. Some damage simply becomes visible for the first time. Claire's situation worsened quietly after the investigation expanded into the financial transfers connected to the trust accounts. Several assets were frozen temporarily while attorneys reviewed the records. Friends who once filled her dining room every holiday suddenly disappeared from her life, one by one. People admire confidence until consequences arrive. Then they protect themselves first. Sophie visited me during spring break. She spent most mornings collecting shells along the shoreline while asking endless questions about the ocean. Children recover from tension faster than adults when honesty finally enters a room. One afternoon, while we sat together on the back deck eating grilled cheese sandwiches, she looked up at me seriously and asked, Grandma, are you happy here? I looked toward the water before answering. The truth surprised me a little. I think I am learning how to be, I said. Sophie smiled and returned to drawing shapes in the sand with her sneaker. Simple answer. Simple acceptance. No manipulation hidden beneath it. Just honesty. That evening, after she fell asleep in the upstairs guest room, I walked alone onto the beach carrying Harold's old notebook beneath my arm. The sky had turned deep orange across the horizon while waves moved slowly in the fading light. I sat down near the water and opened the notebook carefully. Most pages contained ordinary things: grocery reminders, vacation ideas, repair notes, small pieces of a future we once expected to share together. Near the back, folded between two pages, I found a handwritten note I had never seen before. "If you are reading this, sweetheart, it means you finally found your way here." I smiled despite the sudden sting behind my eyes. Harold always understood me better than anyone else ever had. I closed the notebook gently and looked out across the darkening ocean. The secret did not destroy my family. The secret revealed the truth about it. Real love does not quietly let someone disappear. Real family notices when a person begins shrinking. And as the tide rolled softly across the shore beneath the cold evening sky, I realized something else too. I was no longer waiting for anyone to give my life back to me. It was already mine.